Within this demo, we're going to be showing a very basic version of what we can do within Jira software to track your assets. So the roles that you have within your company, and then essentially the bill of materials that are associated with those roles. So bundles of hardware and software essentially within our CMDB object schema here. And what we're going to do is we're going to show how we can utilize the automation engine within Jira to essentially attach those bundles of hardware and software assets to an onboarding request, an onboarding ticket through the automation engine. And then also through that automation engine, once that bundle is attached to an employee's onboarding Jira issue, it will kick out, we can enable it to kick out requests via webhook to several different systems. So all of the software systems you need to provision for that user, as well as any vendors that you need to order the hardware from. And as part of this, we are also going to create some automated subtasks underneath of that onboarding request. So it's all holistically within one request for confirming that those orders were sent out or those orders were filled, or if any of those need to be done manually by the person performing that onboarding, we can create subtasks for that as well. A lot of autonomy with, what subtasks we create along with this onboarding ticket. So what I want to show first is the object schema portion of this. Over here in our people's object schema, we have some demo data around our organization. So the people in it, managers, departments. What we want to focus on here, though, is the roles. So each of these roles can then have a reference to a bill of materials, which in the schema I called a hardware bundle and a software bundle, and then it can be populated, so pointing at that bundle of assets that is going to be provisioned for that role. So as a developer, if your HRIS system has a new developer being onboarded, we will be able to consume all of that data surrounding that person, and part of that data should be their role. So we can then, within the automation engine, which I'll show here in a minute, assume that the developer for that new developer onboarding is going to get a hardware bundle called the developer laptop kit and a software bundle called the standard software bundle. And so if we jump over to the IT employee assets object schema, which is where we store, all of the supported devices and software cloud subscriptions that we provision out to those new employees, we will see a new object type that I created at the top of this called catalog bundles. And this is where we can build out essentially putting all those Lego pieces together, build out the different bundles and kits that we want to associate with those roles. So you can have as many of these as you would like, of course. The attributes being very customizable. For this example, I made laptops, monitors, phones, mice, keyboard, so a lot of the hardware that you would get as a new employee, and then cloud subscriptions, all part of those bundles. You can have more of that though. So you could have, different additional hardware pieces. You can have different types of software subscriptions or something like that in different attributes if necessary. So if we look at that developer laptop kit within the object schema, we'll see that built into this developer laptop kit, we have, of course, the standard laptop model that a developer would get, the monitor they would get, the Android Samsung phone, the litany of cloud subscriptions that by default they will get provisioned, as well as a mouse and a keyboard, both Logitech. And then if we back up here, we'll see we have three different laptop kits, standard, developer, and enhanced laptop kit. And these are all going to look similar, but they're going to have the different models that we provision out and different cloud subscriptions that we give access to these different roles that are associated with these kits or bundles. And then you'll see the standard software bundle here is something where we can bundle cloud subscription into it as well. So if you wanted to separate the software from the hardware, we can have like software catalog bundles and hardware catalog bundles. There's a lot of different ways that we can structure the data model here to store it in different ways that make it easy to only associate software things or only associate hardware things or do them all within one bundle. It really depends on how much autonomy you want to be able to kind of like a la carte select those different things. Of course, ad hoc, you can request any of these individual objects that make up the bundle. So no worries on doing it individually. We just want to understand how many different types of aggregates we need that are then automatically associated with those roles over in this role area. So just to show maybe another example, Operations Manager has a hardware bundle enhanced laptop kit, and we'll select that standard software bundle to be a part of their role as well. So any operations manager is going to get both of these associated with them automatically, and it will populate the request when it comes in and gets automatically created. So let's jump over there. When it comes to creating Jira issues, this is what it would look like manually to create a Jira issue with the create button at the top. There's a couple of different ways that we can auto-populate incoming issues. So for example, with your HRIS system, we would likely create a custom integration that pulls in information, or your HRIS system pushing information to the Jira system. We could catch that within an automation rule, which I'll show here in a second, and populate all of these fields that you see with values in them in that automation rule, which is where we're doing the association of those bundles we just showed from the object schema, the CMDB. Or what we could do is we can use a scripting app, which is very common from our clients, to auto-populate all of these values when you click the create button screen and go to this issue type. So it could be that maybe some of these things are manual when you're onboarding an employee, like determining whether they get the standard role equipment or no equipment, determining who maybe their manager is, or any other fields that you may feel aren't automatic because they're not information stored within the HRIS system. This gives you the ability to populate manually some of those fields. If every single field is automatic, we could do it through the automation engine, right? But if necessary, we can script this so that a bunch of these fields come from that pushed API call from your HRS system, and a few of them don't, right? A lot of different ways that we can do that. For the purpose of this demo, I did this manually, so I populated some of these fields because we don't have that integration set up quite yet. But please use your imagination. We have several different ways that we can populate the values of these fields from an external platform. So what I did here is we're onboarding Tom Hanks. I selected his region and his office, which are also objects within our CMDB here, so that those all are associated with him. The key one here, though, is of course that employee role, which will have the association to the bill of materials that we're going to provision to Tom Hanks here. So this is something that very likely will be coming from that HRIS system. So it would populate, and it would be operations manager or developer or consultant, whatever that role is. And this is going to be our main identifier for associating that bill of materials. So when we go to create this, it will then kick off an automation rule and start to actually populate that request with all the things that we need, right? So you'll see the things that came over from the HRIS system in the main area here, the main default area. And this is also, you can change what fields are displayed here. If you don't need to see all this information, that's fine as well. But we can see all of this stuff attached, including our operation manager's role, which if we open up here, we'll see what is associated with that, right? So we can see, hey, they get that enhanced laptop kit, and we can drill into that laptop kit and see what they get are supposed to be provisioned, through the automation, through that association in the CMDB. And it'll all be stored here. I created a tab specifically for the hardware kit that was associated with that user. What we can do even further is we can say, hey, let's just have a whole tab for the software provisioning that is associated with the operations manager role as well. And you can see all of their software, subscriptions that we're supposed to be giving them access to as well. But just as an example, and for the purpose of this demo, I did the hardware kit bundle with the enhanced laptop kit. You can see the catalog bundle that they're supposed to get. and you can see the individual pieces of that catalog bundle within here as well. And then a little further down, you'll see that we also auto-populated some subtasks to confirm that we sent out an order for the laptop to the laptop vendor, an order for the iPhone to Apple, and our Apple licensing, as well as the mouse and keyboard from Apple and those software license allocation things. So this is just a manual sanity check to ensure that the automation kicked out, all of these orders and we got confirmations from the vendors or the IT employee that is going to be actually kicking off the software license allocation. So these subtasks can be automatically assigned to specific users or groups. So if we do have a team that is going to be the one performing the software access, if it's not automatic, of course, we can try to plug in and do as much automation as possible. So things for like Office 365 or the Microsoft Suite or the Google Suite likely has an API call that we can leverage to automatically provision those users an account with their email address. That should be part of that information coming from the HRIS system. But when it comes to anything that's manual, subtasks are extremely helpful because we can automatically kick those off to a specific assignee, and they can have their own workflow to ensure that we mark those as done before we complete the workflow for their onboarding, right? So before this gets into complete, we can have a condition to ensure all of these subtasks are also in a completed state. Now, with that said, what's happening in the background is all through this automation engine. And for those unfamiliar, the automation engine within Jira is essentially a when, if, then else system that has the ability to branch. So in this example, I did it somewhat manually for the purpose of the demo. It can be pretty automated and dynamic, and I'll explain how. But just to go through the basics of what this is doing, when the issue is created and it matches the employee onboarding type, so anytime we get a new onboarding request, we then determine what role it is with the branches. So, hey, if it's an operations manager, we do these things. If it's a consultant, we do these things. And if it's a developer, we do these things, right? And this is where, as part of this issue fields condition, there's a couple of different ways we can do this, right? Typically, we will just look at the employee role field and have a branch for each role to take a different action, right? We can also do this based off of the different role categories, right? Like you can have roles within a category, and those categories can mirror the bill of materials, right? But essentially, as long as we have the information from the HRIS system to go against and validate the role, we can then kick off specific actions based off of that role, right? And then within here, so within the operations manager like Tom Hanks is, we then start to pull information from that CMDB with the asset query language that we leverage to query that CMDB. So here we're saying, let's grab the catalog bundle enhanced laptop kits because that's the one that we want for the operations manager. And this is where we can take this a step further. This syntax is somewhat manual because we're saying, hey, for operations manager, we're hard coding it being the enhanced laptop kit. And then we're going to grab the pieces under here that are associated with that advanced laptop kit. What we can do is we can pull this a little bit more dynamically with what they call smart values within the automation engine to say, okay, based off of the fact that the employee that we're onboarding's role is operations manager, we're going to query the CMDB for the operation manager's role. And then we're going to look at the attribute for catalog bundles, right? So if we jump back over here to our role within the CMDB, we can query through these roles for what sits within the hardware bundle attribute here, right? So we'll say, let's grab the hardware bundle of that role that we found in the HRIS auto population. So just to back up for a quick second and do a quick overview, the HRIS system pushes all of the metadata for a new onboarded employee to the Jira system. If it's fully automated, we can catch that with the automation rules in here. So that could be the first inception of the automation rule. So rather than when the issue is created, it could be when we get that push webhook request from your HRIS system, then we create the issue itself. So rather than manually creating be the trigger, we can have that push from the API or that webhook from your HRIS system be the trigger. We can then populate that type of request, so our employee onboarding request, with all of the data that we saw within the Tom Hanks request that we were showing. And then we can take the employee role that got pushed from the HRS system and use it as our main query to the CMDB, right? So everyone following so far, we get information from the HRS system. It triggers the creation of an issue within the automation engine. It populates the issue with all of the information from the HRS system. And then one of those being the employee role, we leverage that to query all of the information surrounding that role, including what hardware and software bundles we want to provision for that new employee. So the automation engine can then say, okay, based off of the fact that the operations manager role gets the hardware bundle enhanced laptop kit, we're going to populate the rest of the fields on that onboarding request with all of the important hardware that goes into that bundle, right? So your laptop model, your phone model, your keyboard and mouse model. And then we can also create as many subtasks for any manual effort necessary, right? So this is creating and populating your onboarding request in its entirety, if that's the way that we want to do it, right? Based off of information coming from the HRIS system. Now, what we can do to take this a step further, so that's the inception of the request, right? Some of it being manual if necessary. But if we want to also take it further and automate the ordering of that hardware or the provisioning of that software, that's where the automation engine can get pretty creative as well. If we look at the available actions that we can take once this automation rule kicks off, one of which is sending a web request, right? This is the one we'll probably leverage the most. You can also send an email. So we could populate an email body with what that hardware model is. So, hey, we're going to automatically send an email off to our vendor for our Apple laptops and phone. And we're going to populate that content with what I was mentioning before, the smart values, right? So we can store, when we query the CMDB for the catalog bundle and the laptop and phone models, we can then store these laptop and phone models that it returns into a smart value and then populate the body of this issue with that smart value. And I'll show you how that's done here. So we have custom field values. We can search for them. So we store those objects, the laptop model, the phone model, in custom fields. And then we can grab those custom field IDs. So supported laptop models, we can just grab, we'll copy it, and we can say, hey, Mr. Apple vendor, we need this laptop model and this phone model, right? So we'll look for the phone model, supported phone model, custom ID. And so then we can send this off automatically to the Apple vendor and say, okay, we need these ordered. And we can even then populate this with something like where to send it, right? So part of Tom Hanks's onboarding was his location, right? I think it's, yep, employee location. So we can grab that employee location that was associated with that user too, and say, please send these to this office, right? And we'll dump in that employee locations office. So there's a lot of information stored within these smart values, these custom fields that we can auto-populate and send out via email, as well as, that was one example, as well as through a webhook, right? So when it comes to like the software provisioning, we could do the same thing and we can post information that we queried from our CMDB and put it into these header content types, right? So for like the software provisioning stuff, maybe our Office 365, we can grab the value that we want to send to that, right? And so if we look for our subscriptions, oh, we didn't put that in the custom field actually. Well, we got to do this. Here we go. There we go. So our cloud subscriptions that we want to send off, that's what we can populate this value with. This could be our cloud subscriptions, right? So that's that's a pretty basic version of it. If we want to do it so that this will actually return all of the cloud subscriptions since it's a multi-value, we could do them individually. The other, because they're probably going to get sent to different places, right? The other thing that we can do is we can kind of just populate we can populate like subtasks which with each of the cloud subscriptions. Um, or what we can do is we can grab their email address, so like the reporter email address, and just grab that information since that's probably what we would be provisioning the software assets to, and say, hey, this is the email address that we want to give the Office 365 access to, right? So we can kick out a lot of information, as you can see from these smart values. A lot of the Jira information, Jira issue information. So this is where you can grab the reporter's email address, right? So this is what we would probably send off to either an email to the IT team that's going to provision it manually. We can populate the subtask with this information, or we can kick it out via web request for the API of like Microsoft Office 365 to take this email address that we dump into this header and provision an Office 365 account for it, right? And we can pass them a couple things. We can say, hey, this is the email address we want to provision to Office 365, and this is the level of access we want to give them within that software tool, right? So a lot of different information can be passed through these web requests or through the email addresses based off of these smart values. And essentially, this means any value that we have stored within our CMDB, so any of our supported hardware assets, any of our cloud subscriptions, any of the information surrounding them too. So if we dig into like our Office 365 cloud subscription here, any of this information that we store alongside of it can also be passed through smart values. So there's a lot of information that we can pass through the automation engine. I definitely want to stress this is pretty flexible in terms of what we can send out, right? And that's where the automation comes full circle. So just to recap everything that we went through, the HRS system would push information to the Jira system. We would catch that webhook within an automation rule and trigger the creation of our employee onboarding issue and populate that employee onboarding issue with field values coming from our HRIS system. So all the information surrounding that new employee we're onboarding. And then we would query the CMDB database based off of the role provided by the HRIS system. And we would then we would be able to identify which bundles, bill of materials, software subscriptions, anything else associated with that role that we want to by querying that CMDB. And then we can populate individual fields with the items within that bill of material as extensively as we want to. We can create subtasks for manual confirmation, manual access provisioning, manual hardware provisioning, any steps that you guys want to take manually within the process, we can create subtasks for, as well as just confirmation of those automated tasks is often created as well, just to make sure that we do a sanity check. And then finally, we can leverage actions to send out emails as well as send out web requests to automate some of that provisioning and automate some of those vendor requests, populating it with field values, smart values from our object schema, right? So all of these things that we're pulling from our object schema, all the models, all the software subscriptions, the information coming from the HRIS system that we already pulled in, all of that can be sent in via smart values, via web request to make sure that those vendors and whoever is provisioning that access or the automated system that is provisioning that access has the information necessary to take those actions automatically. As you can see, there's a lot of different other actions that we could take here. So we could send out Teams or Slack messages. We can fetch data, refetch data. There's some miscellaneous ones. So connections to a couple of different systems automatically built within the automation engine here. I don't want to downplay how extensive they've created actions, built-in plug-and-play actions. So this is the low-code, no-code option for taking automated actions across the entire Jira system. So this is one use case that I built out with some pretty basic functionality. We can take this pretty far and pretty extensively to automate your process as much as possible. And so that's everything I have to show today. The endpoints, the touch points at the beginning connection with the HRIS system is something that we can definitely create as part of the engagement. And this end system, the very end of the automation rules where we're kicking out automated actions, we can of course start to populate those web requests, work with the APIs of the external systems that we're sending information to, and automate as much of that provisioning as possible for the team.